Potion Masters, chapters 9 and 10. 2 miles southeast of Montferrel in Sermersooq, Greenland, Priscilla Rook stared at the sign protruding from a section of the barbed wire fence. She shivered. Miansurit aput Sirsurtuk, avalanche danger. Tornasuk, polar bears, and Tizerhook, snake monsters. Greenlandic warnings such as these sufficiently deterred most of the locals from wandering too far beyond the fence. Who would want to be chased by polar bears or snake monsters while avoiding an avalanche? But Priscilla knew the truth. The ground was firm and solid and unlikely to give way to an avalanche any time soon. Most of the polar bears lived at least 100 miles west of the barrier, and snake monsters were nothing more than a myth created to scare villagers away from something worse, something they wouldn't understand. Plumes of crystallized breath puffed from Priscilla's lips as she breathed on her special glasses. It may have been on the waning end of summer in northern Greenland, with a bright yellow sun shining in the sky, but the temperature was only 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Priscilla loathed the cold. She could hardly brew anything in such nasty conditions. An elixirist had no business in such a place. Bundled in the warmest yakskin coat she could purchase on short notice, she wiped the fog from her glasses and placed them on her eyes. The words on the wooden sign transformed into another message. Be warned! This is the forbidden zone of Mezerix, scourge of nations. The same message was repeated on every sign across the icy mountainside. The name Mezerix sent an unpleasant tremble through Priscilla's shoulders. How long had he been trapped here? 12 years? His anger would be severe now. Mezerix's land spanned for miles, but he could be anywhere, watching. Doubt filled her thoughts as she looked upon the barbed wire fence and took a careful step back. No doubt it would be stained with something sinister. Did she have the supplies to cure rot or plague, two of Mezerix's favorites? You can't do this, Pris, she hissed under her breath. What were you thinking? Above her, gray pillows of clouds moved slothfully across an equally gray sky, and she cinched her fur-lined hood close to her ears. They felt numb and achy, as though she could pinch her lobes and they would plumb fall off. It would storm soon, like it always did, and the trail would become too treacherous to travel. Since she spent most of her time alone thousands of miles south of Greenland in her quiet cottage in Portugal, with few creatures to talk to other than a goat and an eel, Priscilla always spoke out loud to herself. Look at those clouds. She looked up and gnawed at her lower lip. Do you want to get caught outside in a blizzard? The temperature's going to drop. You know this, she nodded in acknowledgement. The temperature would drop. She knew she had no choice but to continue on. Turning back was not an option. Returning the glass to her inner coat pocket, Priscilla removed her ratty brown gloves and a leather pouch from her bag. She sprinkled pink detection powder across the rusted brown barbs of the fence. The powder settled on the wire, but that was all. Had there been a dire substance infection, the grains would have jumped and popped like a 4th of July sparkler. No reaction meant one of two things. Either Mezerix had never wandered to this particular spot, or he wanted a safe path for wanderers to travel through in order to capture them. Priscilla felt the second was most likely the truth, but there seemed to be an excellent chance Mezerix was somewhere else on the property. Somewhere far from the fence. How could he possibly know the goings-on of every inch of the forbidden zone? Stepping through a gap in the barbed wire fence, her eyes in constant motion, Priscilla pulled the drawstring on the pouch tight, dropped it in her satchel, and snapped the clasp with her thumb. Taking a deep breath, she pressed forward just as heavier snow began to fall. By the time the sun had descended beyond her sight, only clouds occupied the sky overhead, and the precipitation had transformed into a biting mixture of snow and sleet that snapped at her cheeks like a swarm of angry wasps. It had been so long since she'd been here, she couldn't remember the direct path to the cave, and she began to worry. Was she lost? If so, where would she stop along the trail to make camp? Where would she find good dry timber for a fire? Her stomach gurgled, and she grimaced with annoyance. You had to eat all those berries, didn't you? Couldn't have saved some for dinner? No matter. There's bound to be. She clamped her mouth closed in surprise as she finally spotted the trail slicing through the mountain. 2 familiar marks appeared on the eastern wall, handprints, one belonging to her, the other to her sister. The paint had been bright red when they had marked the trailhead 12 years ago, but now it looked more like dried blood. "This is it," she whispered as a wave of emotion swelled inside her chest. She took a step forward, but sputtered to a stop when she heard the sound of toppling rocks behind her. Swallowing, Priscilla turned around. Mesrix stood about 20 yards from her on the path. His long mane of unkempt white hair would have camouflaged his face against the snowy backdrop had it not been for the charcoal gray streak flowing through it and his silver-pointed beard. He wore black suit pants and a suit coat with wide lapels and a black buttoned shirt underneath, and he was barefoot. Struggling not to lose control, she tried to force the memories of the ceremony that had banished him to the mountains from her thoughts. "Hello, Priscilla," Mesrix purred. "Still talking to yourself? That's not accepted in society now, is it?" Priscilla steadied her hands at her side, her chest pounding with fear. "Hello, Father," she replied, unable to keep her voice from trembling. Chapter 10. It was Friday night, and Gordy sat at the dining room table, his chin smashed in his palms, eyeing his slice of pepperoni pizza going cold on his plate. Seated across from him, Gordy's dad had his face buried in the latest issue of Royal Dishwasher magazine. Every so often, his dad would laugh at something he had read. Isaac was scarfing down his 4th slice of pizza while Jessica flicked bits of cheese across the table with her fingers. "Stop that," Gordy muttered. He was the only one paying any attention to them. Jessica gave him a crusty stare. "You're not in charge." "Yeah, but Dad is," Gordy fired back, slightly more aggressive. His dad snorted and said, "Heat-resistant drainage tubes. What a hoot." Then he folded up the magazine and set it aside. "All right, you guys, what's up? Why's everyone all rattled?" "I want a salad," Jessica whined. "I hate pizza." "Who hates pizza?" Mr. Stitzer leaned across the table and peeled a pepperoni off Jessica's untouched slice. He popped the piece of greasy meat into his mouth. "Every kid likes pizza, and your mother hardly ever serves it for dinner." "And when she does, she usually hides fur and eyeballs and stuff in the sauce," added Isaac. "Exactly." Gordy's dad pointed at Isaac. I would have thought I'd be praised for ordering out, but the only one of you guys enjoying themselves is Isaac." Isaac belched and nodded. "What's wrong, Gordo? You feeling sick?" His dad gave him a concerned look. "When's Mom getting back?" Gordy asked. Gordy's mom had to check in, had yet to check in, and it had been close to 24 hours since she hurriedly left on the airplane. No one knew where she was going. At least Gordy didn't think his dad knew. It was possible his dad was just keeping tight-lipped on the matter. His dad shrugged. "She didn't give an exact date. A week, maybe." "A week?" Gordy couldn't remember a time when his mom spent more than a couple of days out of town. How was he supposed to wait that long to find out what was in Aunt Pris's package? The more he thought about it, the more it caused his stomach to twist. Gordy sighed. "May I be excused?" "Of course," his dad said, and Gordy slid out of his chair. "May I be excused too?" Jessica widened her eyes with hope. "Not until you finish your dinner." "But Dad, what about Gordy? He hasn't eaten anything either." "She makes a valid point, Gordo." Mr. Stitzer nodded at Gordy's plate. Glaring at his sister, Gordy snatched the cold piece of pizza and crammed the entire piece into his mouth. "Happy?" he asked, which actually sounded more like "Abby?" Jessica slouched in her chair, frowning as Gordy left the kitchen, noisily munching his meal. Gordy's secret hiding spot lay beneath a 2-foot square section of carpet on his closet floor. The carpet's web-like design meant that anyone looking at the floor would easily miss it, including his parents, though he suspected his mom knew of its existence. Upon pulling back the carpet, a loose board gave Gordy access to a fairly deep compartment underneath. He couldn't hide everything he wished to within the hole, but it was large enough to house a number of his possessions. A narrow wooden crate held nearly a dozen quart glass vials of liquid. The bottles contained different colored substances, some thin and watery, others dense and gloppy. These were his most dangerous potions, ones his mom might raise a fuss over. Gordy had labeled each vial with a section of masking tape: rat magnet, the baldurator, rocket vomit. One of the labels had the words extra limb written on the tape. That dark purple potion would cause an additional appendage to suddenly appear on whoever drank from the vial. There was only one problem with it. Gordy had only tested it out on cockroaches. He wasn't exactly sure what sort of appendage would grow or where it would come from. Lying next to the crate of vials was Gordy's potion journal. It had a squishy brown leather cover and an elastic band stretching from the back, which attached to a small brass knob on the top, keeping the journal closed tight. Every night, Gordy would sneak into his closet, pull out his journal, and jot down the ingredients needed to create the potions he had thought up during the day. From his last count, he had logged almost 350 unique potions. It wouldn't be long before he would need a new journal. Aside from the potions and his journal, Gordy usually kept only one other item of importance in the hiding place. He stared back at the black and white photograph of two young girls, probably close to Gordy's age. Both of the girls were holding a prize in their hands. The girl on the left held a severed lizard's tail like it was some sort of ribbon. Picture time. The girl on the right, who was at least a foot shorter than the other, held an enormous leg bone. The two girls were Gordy's mother, Wanda, and his Aunt Priscilla. Standing behind them was an older man with long dark hair, pointy eyebrows, and a scruffy beard. It was the only picture Gordy had of his grandpa Rook, who had spent most of his years toiling as a potato farmer in northern Idaho. He had died just before Gordy was born. Before he covered up the hole with the floorboard, Gordy glanced sideways and sighed as he examined Aunt Pris's package. He couldn't just leave it downstairs, unprotected. There were too many questions surrounding the mysterious box. He hoped his mom would understand. Gordy hoisted the package out of the hole, sat down on his bed, and unfolded the note from his aunt. Wanda, I did what I thought was best. I'll explain it all once I'm clear. I'm so sorry, but I had little choice. Get ready for a war. Pris. Get ready for a war? He whispered. An actual war? Or was it some sort of code only an elite elixirist like his mother would understand? Rubbing his fingers together, Gordy picked up the smallest vial. Taking extra care not to touch the cork stopper, he examined it in the light and flicked the glass with his fingernail. The bottle looked completely empty. Maybe he had imagined the appearance of the blood-like liquid, but Gordy didn't believe it. He ran his thumb over the spot where the bottle had pierced his finger and recalled the sudden pinprick. This is stupid, he muttered. His Aunt Pris may be mischievous, but she wasn't careless. She would have known Gordy might get to the package first, and nothing had happened to him since the vial pricked him. No weird formations of boils or third eyeballs. Gordy exhaled slowly as he turned his attention to the bottle containing the cream-colored potion. He knew he should wait for his mom to come home, but curiosity propelled him to continue. He swirled to the potion in the vial, and the liquid sparkled like the inside of a seashell. He shook the vial to agitate the potion, but the contents only glopped back and forth like thick slime. Gordy pinched the cork between his thumb and finger and twisted until it slid free. Bringing the opening up to his nose, he breathed deeply. The smell was dull, odorless, and indescribable. He furrowed his brow in concentration, taking a deeper breath. But Gordy couldn't detect anything, not a distinct herb or chemical or the faintest hint of an ingredient. Gordy's mom had once tested his ability with 50 different potions, ones he had never smelled before, and he had only missed identifying a handful of ingredients, and most of those were insignificant amounts within the potions. And yet, despite the deciphering skill, there was nothing unique within that bottle. The doorbell rang downstairs. After a few seconds, Gordy could hear his siblings squabbling over who got to open the door as they raced down the stairs and slid across the floor. Still seated on his bed, Gordy recorked the vial and placed it carefully into the small box. He listened as Isaac undid the deadbolt and the security chain and opened the door. "Hello," came a woman's soft voice. "Is your mommy or daddy home?" "My dad's home. My mom's far, far away," Isaac replied. "Really?" the voice inquired. "Did she just leave this evening?" "Yesterday. She left on an airplane." "Oh, how nice. Where did your mother go?" Gordy scrunched his eyebrows and got to his feet. Why was this woman interested in his mother's whereabouts? He stepped into the hallway and craned his neck to peer down the stairs. A woman wearing a dark red pantsuit and high heels stood on the porch. Isaac had pulled the door wide, giving her a full view of the entryway. She wore thin glasses and had short, spiky blonde hair. In her left hand, she held a brown leather bag. Standing behind the woman was a middle-aged man with gray hair and a beard, wearing a sport coat and a floral tie. Gordy's dad appeared from the living room and pulled Isaac from the doorway. "May I help you?" he asked. The woman grinned warmly. "I hope so." With a flick of her wrist, she produced a white business card. "Esmeralda Faustus, attorney at law." She spoke with a British accent, and it reminded Gordy of one of the television shows his parents liked to watch on Sunday evenings. "This is my associate, Yeltsin." Gordy's dad examined the card, turning it over in his hands to read both sides. "Ah, very good. And what can I do for you, Miss Faustus?" "Please, I prefer Esmeralda." "You may keep that," she said when Mr. Stitzer tried to return the card. "Thank you." Mr. Stitzer attempted to place the card into his pants pocket. "Well, if you're not going to take care of it, you might as well give it back." Miss Faustus snapped her fingers. "Take care of what?" Gordy's dad asked, looking baffled. "You'll just forget about it and end up washing those pants and ruining it. It's a waste of good credentials. Ask anyone in the professional world." "Oh, I apologize." Gordy's dad quickly removed his wallet from his back pocket and inserted the card into one of the slots. "Is that better?" Miss Faustus smiled evenly. "It's Gordon Stitzer, correct?" "Gordon, I represent several clients who are deeply concerned and have voiced formal complaints with the Department of Health and Safety." She ran her thumb down the edge of the door and stared at the smudge with a faint look of disgust. Mr. Stitzer flinched. "Formal complaints about us?" "Indeed." She rubbed her smudged thumb and forefinger together. "Improper emissions, careless disposal of dangerous waste, tendering of unregistered and, in many cases, banned plants and substances." She snapped her fingers at Yeltsin, who produced a piece of paper from his sports coat pocket and handed it to Miss Faustus. "All changes are included in this affidavit," she continued. "Do you have a garden by chance? A greenhouse?" Gordy's dad didn't answer as he glanced at the page. "Have you and your wife spent any recent time abroad, and within that time have you purchased any fruit, vegetables, or animals?" I don't think so. I mean, we went to Canada last year, but only over the border to Niagara Falls. I have some Canadian money." That, of course, was a lie. Gordy's mom always brought home suitcases filled with exotic growing things from her travels. If the Department of Health and Safety could have seen inside just one of Mrs. Stitzer's carry-ons, the whole family could be very well arrested. "Do you mind if we come in?" Esmeralda asked suddenly. "Don't let him in, Dad," Gordy whispered under his breath, hoping somehow the idea to turn the woman away would pop into his dad's head. There was something wrong about the well-dressed attorney and her shifty associate, Yeltsin. "It's a bit chilly out tonight. We won't stay long." Esmeralda made a pouty face with puckered lips. I suppose you can come in for a minute," Daddy's Gord conceded. "I'm not quite sure what this—" "Good, thank you," she replied, before he could finish his sentence. Gordy watched Esmeralda step slowly into the entryway, her eyes darting about the room. For a brief second she looked hesitant, almost worried, but then she smiled at Yeltsin and nodded. The gray-haired man stepped across the threshold. It was then that Esmeralda noticed Gordy lurking in the shadows upstairs. "Hello," she called out to Gordy, beaming. Gordy's back thudded against the wall as he tried to vanish. Now, I can see you," she chirped. "Come on down, don't be shy." Reluctantly, Gordy walked down the stairs and stood next to his father. Miss Faustus squinted as she stared at him. "Your name's Gordon, isn't it? Like your father. However, you don't go by Gordon, do you? And you're 12 years old, a bit short for your age, but 12 nonetheless." Gordy's eyes narrowed in suspicion. How did she know about him? She waved her hand dismissively. "I can tell these things. It's my job to be perceptive." Esmeralda returned her attention to Gordy's dad. "You have a lovely home, Mr. Stitzer, well decorated. So this is the landing, and there's the living room, dining room, and in the back would be the kitchen, correct?" She pointed to the different locations on the first floor of the Stitzer home. "That's right," Gordy's dad sounded impressed. "From our recent perusal of your floor plan, and judging by the windows outside, your second level has 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. Esmeralda licked her lips and removed her glasses long enough to clear an invisible blemish from one of the lenses. Mr. Stitzer, I understand your wife Wanda has left town. Gordy's dad nodded. Yes, she's away on a business trip. Will she be home soon? I apologize if I come across as nosy, but what we have to discuss concerns both of you, I'm afraid. Yeah, about what? Who made these formal charges? Until we've completed a thorough investigation of the property, the identities of my clients must remain anonymous. Esmeralda tapped her toe against the hardwood floor and cocked her head, listening. She walked toward the living room, pausing every 2 or 3 steps to tap her foot. Yeltsin followed, mimicking her actions by stomping on the floor. As they disappeared into the next room, Gordy grabbed his dad's arm. Why is she here? She's going to find out about Mom's stuff. You need to make her leave. Such manners, Esmeralda called out from the next room. I take it your son has seen his share of discipline over the years, and if he hasn't, if he chooses to maintain that level of disrespect for authority, he shall. Gordy's eyes widened in shock. No way his dad would let some stranger talk to him like that. For sure he would show the shifty woman the door. He's just had a bad day. Lots of stress, haven't you, Gordy? His dad leaned close and lowered his voice. You need to relax. I'm curious to get to the bottom of these charges. And you aren't helping by being rude. What? Gordy's mouth dropped open. How is he being rude? Gordy heard the distinct sound of a doorknob jiggling. It was coming from the kitchen, where the door was that led into the Stitzer lab. Where does this lead? Esmeralda asked. A basement? Storage, perhaps? Mr. Stitzer rushed into the kitchen. Gordy stepping on his heels, they found Miss Faustus with her arms folded and Yeltsin twisting the doorknob with an alarming amount of force. That's our office, Gordy's dad explained. Why is it locked? Yeltsin asked. One of his bushy eyebrows shifted in a sharp peak. Dad, Gordy urged, gritting his teeth, do something. You know what? I think it's time for you two to leave, Gordy's dad said, though his voice held some hesitation. Until you have legal proof that you're allowed to be here to conduct any sort of investigation, I'm going to need to consult with a lawyer before allowing you back. Esmeralda pursed her lips together and squeezed her slender, manicured fingers with 2 tight fists. As you wish, she nodded at Yeltsin, who released the doorknob. We shall return tomorrow with proof. The 2 of them hurried past Gordy and his dad, nearly knocking over Isaac and Jessica in the living room, before exiting the house completely, the door slamming behind them.